but you actually only adopt in any given year that first year. So that while you are seeing a 5-year plan and you're in effect adopting a 5-year plan, your only commitment is to the first year, because that's the year that would be funded out of your operating budget. And then each successive year we would come back. In all probability, some changes would occur in the 12 months between now and your next budget process, and we would do those adjustments at that time. In the past, some items have been, particularly vehicles and equipment, have been lease purchased, where we would enter into a contract for a 5 to 7 year payout. The most recent example, I guess, is a ladder truck and some police vehicles in a couple years ago. So that's one possibility as a funding source as well. But this is yours now to give us some ideas as to which items you'd like to see funded first, and then we'll go from there and see how much money we have to move forward.
So I would like to start with a question, if I could. The vehicle replacement, I know over the years, which you just alluded to,
Yeah.
we've purchased a number, through different means, a number of new vehicles for the town, police department as well as other vehicles. Where do you feel like we are overall as it relates to
Well,
transportation?
my observation of your equipment up to this point is that your, what I call public works equipment, is in real need of replacement. They have quite a bit of age on them. The police chief has indicated that some years ago, the council decided to go on a plan that every 3 years you would replace police vehicles in order to ensure, after a period of time when they used a lot of federal grant money to replace a number of items. I personally don't think that the mileage, 100,000 is the barometer they use, is necessarily an indicator of whether or not a vehicle needs to be replaced. Some need to be replaced sooner than that because of the maintenance cost. Others can go, much longer. My own personal vehicle, was at 192,000 miles and was still going strong. So the chief would obviously like the 3 vehicle per year requirement, which is what you see on here. Actually, this year I only funded 2 of those in the 3-year cycle. And there are vehicles that I think could be moved around so that they wouldn't necessarily stay with the same driver for a period of time, and that could lessen the amount of miles on certain vehicles. I don't think that you have to do 3 a year in order to maintain a good fleet, but the chief would say otherwise.
I want to fall back to public works real quick. I know when we first come on the board, their vehicles was really pathetic. I don't want to fall into this thing where, once again, we're strapped with buying 3 or 4 dump trucks, 4 or 5 trucks, just because we're not wore out. I do want to keep this on a pace, what we can afford to do. Those vehicles wear out really quick too. They're really work hard. So I just don't want to fall back into that where we got to go out and buy 7 or 8 vehicles because we didn't replace them as we went along. I don't think that's financially smart thing to do. Picking up on the police vehicles, different from the police vehicles, I'm not disagreeing with you because you're the manager. Those cars are run 12 hours a day, sometimes 24 hours a day. So the stress on a police car is going to be far greater than any other vehicle you'll use, because the high speeds that they have to get up to, or safety they have to be, it's just a lot more difference in a police vehicle than it is a normal vehicle. You know that. I'm not telling you that you don't know. Those vehicles, I don't know how many's got stock. I don't know how many cars have got. I don't know. I know there's fire department, whatever. We don't want that fleet. We don't want that fleet falling in this disrepair either. I don't know what he's got over there, what he's got. I wanna be very conscious that we do replace them as they go along, and, cause I know when we first come on board, our vehicles was terrible, especially public works. They was basically walking to jobs. Then they're front end loaded, then four-wheel drive we work in, so. I think stuff like that is to me is a priority in that part.
Now, the police vehicle, as
Congratulations.
long as the person lives within Pulaski County, with 5 exceptions that in the past, the manager and the police chief evidently agreed to, they are take-home vehicles. And they do work 12-hour shifts.
Correct.
And I will agree, that a take-home vehicle is usually better cared for.
Yep.
Than a vehicle that is rotated.
Right.
And they have, personal use of those vehicles, inside the county as well. The last, ones that they wanted to replace, I actually pulled one of those vehicles. Mileage was not, at the 100,000 threshold, and we redid that car, and it's now the car that's used by code enforcement. It rides a little bit rough, because it's a police vehicle. But it can, on the hills that we have in town, that the previous vehicle that the individual had was not in good shape. So I think what really needs to happen is the vehicles need to be evaluated both on mileage and repair cost, and, some recommendation coming out of our fleet maintenance department at the same time that you have the police, with their request. We certainly have replaced police vehicles on a frequency that they are in much better shape than your public works vehicles, but they have different uses, as you well know.
Well, with that in mind, I agree wholeheartedly that evaluating them on their individual merit makes the most sense instead of trying to make a blanket statement about what we need. And then using obviously what it would be wise for us to continue to keep and use. Then I think from that perspective, I think Public Works, given that they obviously have the need, I think we need to prioritize their vehicles over first, and then work from there. That's just my initial thought.
Maybe it would help council if we had like some sort of census of the vehicles and what, so we could plan, especially if we're talking about, like Mr. Ratcliffe said, making sure we're not, if we could see that there was, this dump truck is 8 years old, it's got an expected life of 10 years, so, we should plan to replace it in 2 years, whether it needs it or not. And then, if we still have it, it could be, it would lessen the expense of the new vehicle or so on and so forth. But it would be, I think it would help us maybe prioritize some of these purchases. I mean, I don't pretend to know what a John Deere 5065E tractor is, but I do know that, there are some things that, is it replacing something that is, past its useful life, terms of, I know tractors are done by hours instead of miles, but, having a sense of, what is the critical needs, so that we don't have a vehicle of a certain kind, we can't do something, whereas, I don't know if a skid steer is more of a, we can do more stuff if we have a skid steer in addition to a tractor. We can do different types of projects or something like that. And I would find that useful, for myself, and it might be useful for us to understand, maybe this year we need to, in order to prioritize, make sure we don't get public works vehicles into a deficit, is understanding where they stand as far as that fleet goes.
Well, and for me, and it's all kind of tied to the same conversation, I understand, Darlene, where, Spectrum, where we don't really have an understanding just yet of what the dollar is that we're really gonna have, but at the end of the day, that's really gonna define what we can and can't do. And I know we're specifically speaking on the general fund, but it kind of holds true through the 5-year plan, is it's very front-loaded that, it's kind of like we know right in front of us that we'd like to replace these things. But like if you get down to years 4 and years 5, I would make the assumption that they're saying that we don't expect to have to replace anything.
No, it's really that I don't think people have been through an exercise of planning that far in advance.
Right.
And so, to some extent, it was a struggle to get
Right, so,
the way it is here, just because people have not, and they haven't had the expectation that if they went through the process, that any money would be made available for the equipment. So getting people to really get invested in the process has been a challenge, and I expect that whatever we end up with this year, next year's will be better, because the staff will see the result of some of that, and they'll also see that the long-range planning, or longer-range planning helps. So you do see, for example, in year 2, we jumped from roughly $500,000 requested to $1.7 million. Now, there's a big
skate park.
item in there, which is the skate park. And then the following year is in the 550,000 area, and then it's those last 2 years that are dropping considerably, because I just don't think people have had the foresight to think that far ahead. And then there's some things that aren't on here at all, because we just know we can't afford them. A good example, and I hear it all the time from the staff, is the public safety building that has been talked about for years. I mean, that is millions, double-digit millions that is not shown here, just because we realize it's going to probably be in that 7 to 10 year, if we're lucky, range, which is off the charts.
But so within the framework of us, obviously, we just made budget amendments that, are clear that that there are funds not available, that we're needing to be very frugal and not, expending unless necessary. So if we're talking about public works vehicles, basically, then, the first year of this would replace every single public works vehicle that we felt like needed to be replaced. And then there's no more that need to be replaced in the next 5 years or 4 years. And so is that telling us, or should we assume as a council that all of those pieces of equipment are of such a critical nature that they have been left behind and should have already been replaced, that it's like we need to do every single one of those pieces of public works equipment right now? And if that's the case, then we just have to budget around that and say we have no choice, that's what we've got to do. Fiscally, if it's not the case, then I don't know that and kind of to Mr. Reese's point, it's almost, in my opinion, the basis of the decision of what we can or shouldn't do is, at this point, until we're in a better financial position, it should be based off of have tos, not necessarily want tos, until we found ourselves with money that we could actually call a want to pile of money, and now we may be in a position, in my opinion, that it's like we replace what we absolutely have to run the town the right way and have what we have to have functioning the way we have to have it, but nothing beyond that until we actually have, funds that we could call disposable.
Well, and there are two things I'd say about that. Number one, they're in this upcoming year because they were seen as critical. Otherwise, they would have been put in a future year. As I mentioned at the onset, one of the options that we may have, if certain vehicles are deemed a priority by the council, is that we could lease finance for a much shorter period of time. So that's kind of the interim between cash financing and actual long-term debt service. And in fact, some of these vehicles might qualify for long-term financing, depending on the life of the vehicle, because that's how they are evaluated. First list that totals the $550,000. First of all, I would say to you that the match for the VDOT Main Street money has to be a priority, because we've gotten a couple $1 million to do that, and we're not going to do projects in the future unless we have the match. But those were grants that were in the queue before I arrived. We're actually planning to do those grants 2 years apart, or a year apart. So you see that a second slug of money is needed in 22, 23 to match the second of those grants. We actually put, toward the top, the repairs to 72 East Main. You remember you had a conversation, Rick Tawny was here and talked about those two buildings and what was needed, and we prioritized those two buildings, saying if we had to do something right away, we would do 72, because we think taking the back rear off of that would make it marketable much sooner than doing the roof repairs that are needed for the two, 67 and 69, I think are the numbers. So that's been actually put out until the following year. You all may think that one's more important than 72. And maybe what we need to do is take some people on a field trip, to see some of these. And again, I'm looking for guidance from you all as to what kind of information you want. We can certainly and we can send it out before your next meeting, give you the age of these vehicles and the mileage on them, if they are the kind that have heavy use, like dump trucks or something. And I can point out which ones might be eligible for lease financing versus things that we have to do cash-wise.
I agree with that approach, and to Mr. Rios's point, I do think a brief, a justification, if you will, nothing too complicated, would be useful. I would also like to see specifically the police department is they've done obviously they're looking 5 years ahead, and they've laid it out at a set amount each year for a certain number of cars. I'd like to see something similar for the public works. That would tell me that they're looking beyond their immediate need and really thinking through what their inventory is and what kind of vehicles they have and what type of vehicles they're going to need in the future. So I would like to see that as well.
I mean, I think we could say, it should be that all departments should have a capital that have capital needs should have a capital component to their budget that we can allocate every year, but we should build it into the budget. It seems to me, I think the water fund does that, the sewer fund should do that, and, whether it's public works or the police department or the fire department, the fire department's probably a little bit more, periodic, you're not buying a fire truck every year, but, if we put money aside for a fire truck every year, it wouldn't be $300,000 in 1 year. We could split that, if we split that up over a certain number of years, it seems to me that, a dedicated amount of our funding should go to some of those things, since they are expenses that we know we're gonna run into. Having that, and I don't know how to calculate that, I'll leave that to the staff's expertise, but it seems like we could adopt that, and have, a capital fund, or at least a budget for that, regardless of what that looks like.
Well, I guess as an example, when the fire chief first proposed his new fire engine, it was listed for 21, 22.
Okay.
And then as we looked at, what was here and how it was prioritized, he came in and said to me, I'm willing to move that back. Now, my personal thought is that the way I've done finances in the past is you don't really split a project like that into 2 years, because to order
Right.
the truck, you have to be able to say you've got the amount to pay for it.
Right.
You just don't pay for it that way. So I'm old school and say I need all $600,000 in 1 year, even though I'm not going to pay it out in 1 year, but I have to have the authority, the authorization
Sure.
to be able to enter into a purchase order for that larger amount.
Oh, no, that makes perfect sense. I just meant as just part of our budgeting process, it seems to me that, even if the department doesn't necessarily spend it every year, that they should be allocating a certain percentage of their budget,
And the problem
with the
that,
view towards, maybe we won't spend $100,000 on the dump truck this year, but next year, and then, that way, so
well, that cannot be in the operating budget.
No, I understand that, but I just meant, within our own way of understanding it.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly what the staff has been doing, and
Okay.
that doesn't, and when it gets funded in previous years and doesn't get spent because it's identified as a reserve, a building a fund,
Mm-hmm.
and when it's done that way, it falls to fund balance, and it doesn't go forward as a reserve. So So if you're going to, if you want to identify certain things that you want to build funds over multiple years, then it needs to be in the capital budget.
Sure.
At $100,000 a year, because you need, in 5 years, you need $500,000. And that's been part of the challenge and the frustration of the departments, because they've had many times in the budget a portion that's been called capital outlay, and most of them have been identified as building a reserve, Gatewood Reserve, or the Reservoir Reserve, or water line replacement, or sewer line replacement. But it's not spent in that year, and it wasn't planned to be spent in that year, and they have thought that those reserves were carrying forward, and they haven't been. In fact, had they been carried forward, your fund balances would be even less, because those monies, when unspent, have dropped to the respective fund balance. So we've got to find a way to capture these things, and I'm fine with showing people how to do that, that make sure that the money is building to that time when it's all needed.
Okay.
And I hear your point, and we'll work on that.
I mean, even if it's not necessarily like, just like this is, we are considering, we're not spending it this year because we're expecting to spend it in year 3, but, we would like you to consider, putting it aside or something like
Well,
that.
we need to find a way to put that in.
The capital
like the
budget.
capital
Yeah,
budget for
that
that
makes
very
sense.
purpose, and then identify it as a reserve.
Yeah,
I think,
if we're gonna buy that fire truck in 2022, we'll put a certain amount aside next year or however we decide to do it.
Then I have another question regarding just as a conversation, the repairs to 67 and 69. So I understand that's the parapet issue.
Well, it's a parapet, for one of them for sure, but then one of them also has some interior problems.
Okay.
In fact, a couple people have fallen through the floor.
That's better.
So it's really the idea of, and that one, actually, they had put that down at 15,000 for each one. And I said, why not put it off for a year and do them both at the same time, because there'd be some economy of doing that. But we could split that out, and it could be 15,000 for each one. If
Well, I
people
guess-
wanted to pick one of those.
What do we, I guess you'd have to, I guess my question is, what is our 30,000 versus sitting on the property for an additional year or so? And I don't know the answer to that question, I just thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, well, and the thought there, but again, this is why we're having this discussion, was what would move probably the fastest if we repaired it. And that's why we selected 72. I think I even may have shared with you that I went inside that building with a prospective purchaser, only to find a condition that I would allow the building to be shown again in that condition. Because I think that says,
72 is next to
something-
Warburton's, is that next to the law office on?
no, it's next to an office that a woman has put in a,
It's the 2 down.
yeah, it's a health.
Okay.
It's that
It's in
same road.
It's in that stretch?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's Warburton, there's a new medical office,
Yes.
that one, and then the dental
Okay.
stuff is down
I
there.
wanted to make sure I had the right one, so I was in the neighborhood.
Yes, I would just say, I have no issue with the prioritization of the list. I mean, in the thinking of the public works vehicles needing to be replaced and items, and I would certainly argue second year $1 million skate park seems, like a pipe dream, in our current financing world, but it's prioritized at the bottom of the list, to start with, and I think the way that it's lined out, if you read it through there, I have no issue with, and I agree with what you said with the VDOT matching, obviously is a have to, I mean, those are things we've got to do. For me, at that point in time, my only issue would be, again, what's already been said is really, understanding 3, 4, and 5, understanding how critical the vehicles actually are, and if the money, and then once we get to the point that we understand how much money we actually have, the list will shape up itself based off what we actually physically can do and can't do, either through financing options or actually having money available to do it. But specifically from a priority standpoint, I have no issue with how they're laid out, it's just,
The other big ticket item at the water, under the water and sewer fund, the rebuild of the filters. Do you agree that that needs, I mean, it is certainly a priority without question, we've rebuilt 2 now, is that correct?
Yes. Or we're
2 and 4, is that?
We're in the process, 4 has been replaced, we're in the process of doing 2, so we have 1 and 3 to still do.
Is there any funding available there, or any type of financing available there, or would that even be worth pursuing?
There are funds, they tend to be, with the Department of Health, and then financed through VRA. In fact, that's the source of the money that we have for the Brookmont project. They tend to be a grant loan package, depending on the size of the project. Same thing is true with sewer. Sewer funds are available through the Department of Environmental Quality. You generally have to have at least the design ready before you go for those funds, and they can be significant loan, what they call principal forgiveness, which is essentially a grant, and then 0 interest loans from DEQ. The real issue for grants, number one, I'm trying to get us really under our belts the existing grants. And then in terms of managing grants and writing grants, we don't have staff really to do that. If as we get into budget, I'll probably talk to you, not today, but at a future meeting about staffing needs. And I do think, even though I'm shifting some people around as we do some things, that we are short-staffed in 2 areas that I really think for us to move in an accelerated way, we're probably going to need to have somebody that's devoted full-time to not just grant writing, but grant management. Sometimes the easiest thing is getting the money.
Right.
The hardest thing is managing it. And like in the case of the fact that we have 3 grants for the James Hardy project, each one of those grantees has different requirements. And you have to, constantly looking at each one of those before you make a move. We can't spend ARC money and DHCD money on engineering, but we can spend it with the EDA money, but that has to be matched dollar for dollar. But then the other 2 grantees have to review the RFP before you can send it out, even though they're not paying for it. So it's that kind of thing, managing those nuances that really requires some oversight. So if we're gonna move into more grant writing, I think we need some resources to really manage that and to get somebody who has that experience. And not just somebody who you're gonna train to do that. It's not easy. And then the finance side of it, was even more complicated, because each one has a separate drawdown and match requirement and other kinds of things. So even if we do as I suggested and not accept a grant until we have the match, and then set them up separately, then you still have some issues.
So it sounds like that position that you're going to be proposing could potentially pay for itself if managed.
Oh, could, but I don't think we ought to have it as a consultant relationship. I think it needs to be a staff person.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we've been down that road.
that's my, so,
Well, the management of the staff is easier.
Right, exactly.
Shouldn't be, but it is.
on the replacement of the water lines on Main Street, on the water fund, the $670,000, is that is tied to the Main Street project, as you said, discussed it, is it a necessary $670,000 that we would, that needs to be done?
If
Yeah, it's
we
listed
want
kind of as
to-
a low priority on here, but,
If we want to use the opportunity, which I think we should, to replace and upgrade the water lines that are in the street, the time to do it is when you're tearing up the street. Not put a pavement down and 3 or 5 years from now come in and say, okay, now we're gonna replace the water lines. And we do need, as we bring the downtown forward and get more interest in restaurants and sprinkler systems and everything, we're gonna need to have increased water capacity within those lines. So it's the right time to do it.
And would that be the kind of project that would make sense to finance?
Finance or go after some funding sources, yeah.
It just, it's, cause that's the kind of thing that should take, I mean, there's a long depreciation for that compared to some of these other ones. And is there currently a budget for just general, I see this $40,000 for water line replacement. Is that currently being done, or was that an addition, or is that?
That's the building the reserve that you were talking about.
Okay, but so they're not actually doing $40,000 worth a year. Okay.
They had
And I know that doesn't always, it's not always easy to do, a set amount, but I mean, it seems like we should be doing water and sewer replacements.
we're doing mostly repairs, and what I've said to the staff is after you repair it twice, then you need to replace it.
Okay.
But you don't necessarily replace the whole line, you may replace a section of a line, that is causing frequent repairs. To go in and wholesale replace 350 feet, of water line is gonna cost more than the $40,000.
No, that I understand, but I mean, it seems like with the age of some of our infrastructure that's just gonna happen eventually. I mean, I know there was a big project up in the up by the Northwood School that they did a large amount of replacement work. And and I don't know how that was funded specifically, but it seems like there's probably some places that would benefit from the economies of scale, at least. If you're gonna tear up the streets, you might as well, like you were saying, tear up streets. And I don't know if we have a plan for that, or how does that?
I don't believe that we have a master plan for water line replacement. That's something that we should have. In fact, if you have those kind of plans and then the gas company comes in or the telecommunication company comes in, you can plan certain times that you'll do certain projects. And in fact, if you do it right, the gas company doesn't come in and tear up a street that you just paved 2 years ago.
Right.
Because you have a plan for it, and actually, you get really technical and require, if you have plans, and the other utilities don't adhere to it, then they have to put the street back to
The way it
condition in
was.
which, with the same level of pavement and other things, as opposed to seeing, these patches that you see oftentimes.
And is there, I mean, maybe, I don't know what it would look like to generate that kind of plan, even on a pilot basis, even for like certain sections of town. But is that I don't know what that would cost, but could we get some sort of wrap our head around kind of?
I can get to a contest.
Yeah, I mean, because I think, if there's rumors of an infrastructure plan, and my guess is like the last big infrastructure plan, it's gonna prioritize projects that are as close to shovel-ready as possible. And I would really like to see, I would rather spend a little bit of money now and able to grab as much of those grants and, stimulus, infrastructure, whatever you wanna call them, funds later. But if I'm happy to spend, a little bit up front to be in a better position to do that.
Would you all find it helpful for me to ask Bill Pedigo to maybe come to your next meeting, and then we can both give you some information in writing on some of your questions, and then also have him here to answer directly some of your questions? He's flying back from Key West, so that's why he's not here tonight. But I didn't want to put off any longer getting some reaction from you all about the capital budget.
Let me ask you a question. On heavy equipment, I think I brought this up a few years ago. Like, I know that the water department is looking at a new 4-wheel drive backhoe, but it's not 22, 23. what is your opinion on like heavy equipment like that leasing? Well,
Leasing it or lease purchasing it? Are you talking about just leasing it from
yeah,
a
a lot of
company?
yes ma'am, a lot of companies lease their heavy equipment and every 3 years they automatically get a new one. What versus, how much money we're looking at, this new one is approximately $125,000 then, what would it be to lease one, and then every 2 of them, they're responsible for heavy repair, every 2 to 3 years you would be getting a new one anyway, instead of we buying one I don't know when the last one we bought, to be honest with you. I don't even know if it's feasible, I'm just asking, what's your opinion?
For certain pieces of equipment that you don't use on a regular basis, day in and day out, you're better off leasing.
Purchasing.
And anytime you have a big project, the community I came from, we demolished a bunch of old buildings that were on a rail yard site. We didn't have the equipment to do it, but we rented it. And you never want to buy something that was single purpose, or,
Right.
or might not use it for, another 4 or 5 years. But for equipment that you're gonna be using day in and day out, I don't think I would recommend just leasing. I would say you need to make the investment.
You recommend just buying it straight out?
But you might buy it on a, as I was saying earlier, a lease purchase arrangement where you wouldn't have to expend all of the money in any given year, and so it's like a mini hit because you have a much shorter term. And some of your local banks usually are willing to finance those kinds of arrangements because they're a shorter period of time, as opposed to a 20-year debt on, let's say, a $2 million project. You did go into debt, which surprised me, on a very small project just before the end of last fiscal year, and debt finance, I think, was $290,000. I wouldn't have put that amount of money on a long-term debt, so that would be one of the first things I try to pay off if you suddenly have a windfall. And something that we're also looking at is current debt that we have and what we're paying with finance charges, interest rates, to see if we ought to refinance, as interest rates are changing. Sometimes it's to your benefit to do that. So I'll have Bill here for next time. I'll get you all the information on the age of these various vehicles. And anything else that you all are interested in at this
I
point?
wanna skip through over here to something you might even wanna get, Chief to, come and, explain. I know what they are, but most other council, night vision weapon sighting system, the 18,000. That's something he might wanna come, or you can bring one and show, whatever. So most of the council know what that is. I've had one of them, what is that? Well, that'd be a good time for him to show what that is and how it works in his department. I don't know how you want to handle that, if you want to, how you want to do it.
And then,
That would be something good.
and you may have already said this part, but just as far as what the intended use of the, say, the new tractor is gonna be, and, whatever, other forward.
I'll get you something on that, and then I'm gonna put Bill in front of you, so you can answer
Okay.
all the questions that we don't answer. That's a payback for him.
I wonder this about the, I you wanna put those, the bills there?
Well, you can try me on it. I know an awful lot about it, because I spent a lot of time with it in my previous life.
Well, I kinda have an interest in it because I'm looking at it a bit. Seems like our biggest concern here was replacing manhole covers.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I've talked to him about that with the idea that, and we are using both. Both the manholes that have holes and then the ones that are sealed, completely. Probably some of our biggest I&I, of course, you're never gonna get rid of all that here last time said something similar. But some of your storm drains are just as big a problem as your old lines, you know, having infiltration from cracks and age and everything else. And we probably need to, just in the same way that you talked about master water plan, we probably need a storm drainage plan even before an I&I plan that would be addressing just the lines themselves. But let's put Bill on the spot regarding your manhole covers. How's that?
Thank you.
There's no more discussion about that. We'll just move on to the council's comments. So, Mr. Penn, do you have any comments today?
Oh, no, comment on one thing, Ms. Griffin, on the 201 Lynn Circle, they complain about the, buzzers.
Buzzards, yeah, and I've had people complain that somebody's shooting at them, which we shouldn't. What was the address?
201 Lynn Circle.
Okay.
We had a noise cannon in past years that we set off on a regular basis, which apparently had some impact on.
It just moved them from one place to another. I mean, from my experience, you know, they were in the cemetery, they shot off fireworks, they moved down the street, they shot off fireworks, they moved up the street, you know, I mean,
I gotta live somewhere.
yeah.
But they are a nuisance, a nasty nuisance. I know.
I'll check that particular area. I know early on, and I come in here, we did get one complaint in an area. I don't think it's the same address, but I'll go back and look and
We're
see
also-
what's going on here.
We can also get a permit to remove some of them, is that correct?
60 year,
How many?
I think 60 year.
6
Mr. Dawson, do you have?
No comment today.
Mr. Reese?
No, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Mr. Rapp?
Just a little bit.
Of course.
Back to her budget, Ms. Bertram, I know she's already jumped in this thing. I feel 100% confidence that you've already cut in, you know where it's gotta go, and you operate, so I'm 100% behind. Your budget equities. I probably look forward, to the first time in a long time, of going through a budget, feel But, I appreciate all the work you've done up to this point with it too.
Okay.
You've done a good job.
The staff is working with me very hard on this and are excited really about being able to be more involved.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Cox, do you have anything?
Nothing this evening.
Mr. Reese?
No.
I have one thing. Sorry. So, I would like for you to see if you can find out apparently, previous, someone before me had said that if this goes back to the skate park, they had funds, they got funds that we would, the town would match it. And I've been asked by a couple people about this. Just wanna make sure that those funds didn't go to me to build a pool, an indoor pool that I don't have, but no, that, I've had multiple people asking me about where those funds are. I don't know that
I don't think
we've
they've ever been
seen them.
turned over to the town. I think
Yeah.
that whoever started that effort, and it's my understanding that there was a comment that they would be matched. But I think a separate account was set up by the individuals promoting that. And actually, to my knowledge, the council's not been asked to match what they have, but I will tell you that matching what I understand to create what is desired. And that's why, and in fact, I did have posted today a comment that I had Jordan prepare that explains exactly where we are with that process, that the money that the town has received is strictly for remediation of the property, that the soils are contaminated and in their present condition, that site could not be used for any recreational purpose, that our intent is to use the money, the grant that we got to remediate the site and to put proper soil on it, and if we have any funds left over, to maybe do some minor concrete paving work, for basketball courts or something. But that's why you have what was an estimate of 3 years ago, the cost to do that skate park as it was envisioned by the consultants that you all had at that time. But there's no money that the town has set aside, and to the best of my knowledge, has never been received.
And also,
Now, as far as your pool, I think I have seen that it's outside.
it is us, and it was also being paid by. Yes, which started years ago. Another issue with that, or not issue, but another question about that is just that if they were able to draw in money from someone that would donate money, we would happily help put that in, right? With the money that they are
Well,
donated.
we need to make sure that whatever money is spent in a way that furthers that plan. So we have to look at how much money was available and what could we, do with that amount. Or we might, as we've talked about with the capital budget, we might put it in a reserve, go ahead and put our match toward whatever that is, still demonstrating the commitment that the town has to the project. But the project's not gonna happen until we amass a certain amount of money or issue debt or whatever arrangement we wanna make in order to make the
Right.
full vision happen.
And I just want the public to know that we are not against the skate park. It's not that at all. It's when we get the funds, then that's when we can move forward. All right, that's all I have for tonight. So if you want to move on with your manager's report then.
Now, I'm gonna do like the rest of you and say no comment.
All right, well, then if we're done with that, then a reminder of the future council meeting is April 6th, 2021, here in the council chambers. Closed session starts at 5:30, public session starts at 7. April 20th, 2021, council work session, closed session at 5 o'clock, public session starts at 6:30.
Mr. Mayor, can I just, because you asked me when I said no comment, something just came to mind. We have a number of high school teams of various sports that have brought some significant recognition to themselves and to the county and to their school as a result of their performance at various statewide events. And we are working on a plan subject to what the coach determines to recognize those individual groups. I'm just curious if the council might consider maybe a special afternoon meeting about the time that school adjourns, that maybe you all could go to the school and we could recognize those various groups at the school, as opposed to scheduling them here in council chambers, because unless the governor changes the number of people that can meet together, it would be several meetings before we could meet with those groups. But if you all are interested, we could offer that to the school as another way. And I think, having heard from Dave and others, that we've done this in the past, and I think this year we've got an unusual number of athletic groups that have excelled. That might be something you want to do, and might be a little bit of a fun thing for you, as opposed to sitting here working on capital budgets and other kinds of things.
Plus field trip, right?
A field trip, yes.
I don't know why I don't think capital budgets are fun. That's fun.
Capital budgets are fun. But if you all are agreeable.
Yeah,
we'll try to-
I'm agreeable with everybody else.
Sounds good.
Okay, all right, we'll work on that. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't take that soon.
If someone would like
With that, I move to adjourn.
And all in favor?
All right.